Hello, everyone. I'm Garrett Womble, and thank you for joining. Today's presentation and discussion by PRAXIS3 Principal Brian Tanner is the fifth part of our six-part webinar series on the future of research libraries, and will focus on the ways designers and facilities officers can take cues from evolutionary biology in terms of the concept of long life, loose fit, and low energy, including case studies from recent PRAXIS3 projects that make use of these strategies. We appreciate the opportunity to answer any questions you may have at the end of today's discussion. Those questions can be submitted throughout the presentation by using the dialog box on the right-hand side of your screen. With that, I'll turn it over to Brian to get us started.
Thanks, Garrett. So as you said, today's program is about designing for change. And there's one change that all of us are dealing with in a pretty primary way right now: COVID-19, social distancing, different ways of organizing our work and otherwise lives. That is not really what this presentation is specifically about. This is about change in a kind of longer time period scale, and about understanding buildings across their entire lifespan. But some of these strategies that we're going to talk about today may be appropriate to COVID, but that's not specifically what we're talking about today. Just wanted to make that clear. Here's our agenda. We are going to, y'all seeing my screen still?
I see it, but we haven't advanced.
Strange. It says it's pausing my screen. How about now?
We came out of presentation mode there. Okay, now we're seeing, there you go.
All right, resetting. Nothing like real-time webcasting. The agenda, we're going to talk about evolution, lessons from the natural world. We'll be talking about biological evolution and a little bit of geology, and maybe some lessons we can take from that. The concept of long life, loose fit, low energy. It's something that's been informing design activity for the last 50 years or so. Going to look at some case studies, one at Georgia Tech, one at ABAC, and one at Georgia Southern. And we'll also talk about some conclusions and strategies, and maybe have time for some questions there at the end. For some reason, my screen is not wanting to advance. All right, so evolution, lessons from the natural world. You guys know these two guys, or at least the person on the left. You might be tempted to think it's two pictures of the same person. It is not. These Charles Darwin on the left, Alfred Russel Wallace on the right, independently of one another, at the same time came up with a similar concept. For some reason, we know Darwin more than we know Wallace, but the two of them developed the ideas that we now understand as natural selection or evolution. Darwin, in Origin of the Species, though, didn't actually call it evolution. He called it descent with modification, which in my ears as an architect sounds pretty relevant to buildings and facilities. He was talking about lots of different ways of looking at the natural world, famously with finches and the structure of their beaks as related to the type of food they ate, whether that's insects, seeds, other types of things. And so really what we're looking for today are ways in which this understanding of descent with modification applies. And the way he kind of described it was that favorable variations prevail while others perish. And we're all pretty familiar with the concept of natural selection, but it was kind of interesting to me to go back and think about it in terms of these favorable variations. So the world changes around us and around the natural world, and it's really those species that have favorable variations are simply the ones that are able to weather the storm and make it through. So those are sort of examples from the biological world. Also from geology, if we think about the role that time plays in all of this, we have different sort of time frames in nature. Change comes in different ways. For erosion and sedimentation, building up of strata of rock, and then over time it eroding away and making landforms like the Grand Canyon here. This is a slow, gradual change that happens over centuries and millennia. It doesn't have usually a very felt effect on any individual person during any individual lifetime, but nonetheless, these are changes that happen. Whereas with heavy weather events, the change can be very swift, but nonetheless permanent. This is Perdido Key off the coast of Florida on the Gulf Coast. Recently, Hurricane Sally came through here and took an island and that was once a single island, created two permanent channels in it, and it's now 3 islands, and the geologists and the weather experts think that this is going to be permanent. It's not going to go back to the way it was before. So opposite of sedimentation, right? This is a very sudden change. And then the most sudden changes, we're all familiar with plate tectonics. In fact, the term seismic shift is a term we use to describe cultural events that have rapid, violent, and disruptive effects. And we can think of the revolution of the computer over the last 30, 40 years as being that sort of tectonic shift or seismic shift. So sometimes changes happen to us very quickly and we have to respond very quickly. Sometimes they happen over time. And to address this, the best sort of design ethic or construction related ethic I've come across is one that I learned from Steve McDowell of BNIM, who's been using this kind of mantra for a long time: long life, loose fit, low energy. It was developed in 1974 by Sir Alex Gordon. He's an architect from the UK. He's built all over the United Kingdom. Also was the president of the RIBA for a few years, and in 1974 delivered a really influential paper in which he articulated this idea of long life, loose fit, low economy as an ethic that should inform the way architects approach their work. And in the almost 50 years that have transpired since then, it has been incredibly influential in terms of people that are interested in sustainability, and also in the idea that our buildings need to be built to last and to be more permanent. So we're going to look at each of those 3 items, the 3 L's: long life, loose fit, low energy, one by one, and kind of break them down into their component parts. So obviously, when we talk about long life, we're talking about durability. In order for something to have a long life, it has to live long, it has to last and be durable. The materials that tend to be durable like this, their finishes are inherent in their makeup. So stone, masonry, some types of concrete, metals with finishes that don't require a lot of application or reapplication of finish. These are strategies, material strategies that can be used to make buildings have a long life, reduce the maintenance required, and increase the likelihood that they will be able to be reused again in the future. Another long life concept, though, is sort of design in a more general sense. And while we all want to design for our specific times, we also want to think about how our designs will be received in the future, and will they be embraced by future generations with different needs and different technologies. So this is not to say that we shouldn't sort of inhabit our own zeitgeist, but we might want to try to avoid painting ourselves into a corner by an excessive sort of use of faddish or trendy things that are so current now, but may paint us into a corner on down the road. So something for us to keep in mind. And then perhaps paradoxically, the concept of beauty is really a long life concept. And while we know that a building has to be durable enough to last for 50 years and further, it also has to be beloved by the community that uses it. And a building that is beautiful and embraced by its users and embraced by its community and appreciated on its own merits is frankly just one that's more likely to survive the wrecking ball. And really, that's so when we think of long life, it is not just about designing things to be durable and maintainable. We also have to think about them from an aesthetic standpoint. Moving on to loose fit. With the concept of tolerance, the image you see here of a loft warehouse, you know, when we think about adaptive reuse, oftentimes the image that will come to most people's minds is an image like this one of a loft building that's been converted into some other use. And that's because these buildings are very tolerant to programmatic change. They have open plans, they have wide structural bays, they have an even structural bay typically, tall ceilings, generous glazing, good natural lighting. And that's why they can be used as apartments, condos, restaurants, offices, nightclubs. All different kinds of uses are appropriate in these things. So these are there are some lessons we can take from the tolerance embedded within 19th and 20th century mercantile loft buildings that we can replicate in other uses. Flexibility. all of us on the call here, probably most of us are dealing with academic environments, and we've been doing this for decades, trying to design the most flexible classrooms we can. It has to do with the size of a space, the proportions of a space, whether it's long and skinny or more square. Its ability to have a modular furniture approach that's reconfigurable and still useful for the type of activity that's going to happen there, and then having infrastructure in the right place so that the various configurations can be properly supported. These are things that we've been doing for a long time, but it's definitely a component of a loose fit ethic. And the last sort of concept about loose fit has to do with adaptability. These are some study rooms in a library project that we recently completed at ABAC, where each of these rooms is identical in terms of its construction and its infrastructural configuration and in every way, but each of them will be furnished in a different way. Unfortunately, this picture was taken before the furniture went in, but one will have a soft seating, more casual approach. One will be more of a conference room type configuration. Another will have sort of like a steel case workstation, working table with a monitor at the end, and another would have kind of like a dining table type setup. And what this allows to happen is to find out how the students will engage with these spaces, and if we find that one is more embraced by the students than another, it's very easy for these to be modified to be more useful and to switch up their use. So they're very adaptable spaces. The last idea of the 3 L's is low energy. We can think about low energy first during the construction or renovation of these projects in particular, and the less resources we can use, generally the better. This is a building in Decatur where we were, it's about a 50, 60-year-old building. We were able to reuse the terrazzo floors. We were able to reuse the concrete floors by adding some pigmented stain. We reused some glazed masonry block, and we repurposed some abandoned wooden bleachers from an adjacent space and had them refinished, and we used them as wall panels and a ceiling finish. So we're trying to keep as much of the carbon footprint within the building itself. And when we do that, we are definitely sort of subscribing to this long life, loose fit, low energy ethic during the construction phase itself. We also want to think about it throughout the lifetime of the project. So best practices from an energy consumption and how we heat and cool our buildings can have a long lasting impact. This is a graphic from our recently completed Georgia Tech library project. Some of you may have seen this image before. I'd love to show it because it's an audacious statistic. The program called for doubling the population of the library, but we were also able to reduce its energy consumption by 60%. So twice as many people served with 60% less energy. That's really increasing the amount of resources that are available to a broader range of people. It also means that this building will be less expensive to operate. And in addition to these buildings being embraced by the users, we really want the people that maintain and have to manage these buildings to embrace them as well. And if these things can be successful and have good return on investment over their lifetimes, again, they become assets that will be more likely to be retained as we go forward in the future. Related to that, user comfort, the experience that users have within a building. Many of these low energy techniques, such as using good solar orientation, like this one, Northern Solar Orientation, avoiding glare and solar gain through windows, access to views and nature. All of these things contribute to the well-being and health of people that are using the building. And so the happier and more well people feel inside their spaces, the more they will embrace them. And again, increases the chance that buildings will survive the wrecking ball and continue to be contributors to the built environment for a long period of time. So that's long life, loose fit, low energy. Let's look at a few case study projects. How are we doing on time, Garrett? Are we okay?
We're good.
All right. First project is the Price Gilbert Library at Georgia Tech. The building on the left, just off the screen, is Carlton Tower. It's a 2-building complex. The building on the right is the Price Gilbert building. And the most significant kind of feature of this building are these 2-story reading room spaces that, although it was built in 1953, 20 years before Wallace coined the term long life, loose fit, The space definitely embodies that ethic. It's a double height space. It has north facing glazing. It gets all of this incredible diffuse light. It has an open plan, uses furniture to organize the space, very flexible, and just an overall pleasant place to be in. So this space was already working in the ways that we were hoping to work as we modify the building throughout the renovation. Here are some photographs from the 1950s. There are two sets of these reading rooms stacked on one another. So the first and second floor, I think you're seeing on the left, and the second and the third and fourth floors on the right have identical two-story reading room spaces stacked on top of one another. You can see how open and airy these spaces were. Here's the renovated condition. We upgraded the curtain wall with high performance glazing that greatly increases the energy performance of the building. Also using ultra clear glass, we get access to nature and a pretty remarkable view of the skyline. We've retained the open plan and the open airy feel, but we've introduced all kinds of places for students to plug in their devices, and we have wireless access points galore all over the place. So this is really optimized for 20th century students, but yet retains some of that original sort of reading room, open space feel as the original building. It's a beautiful space. In fact, it works so well in that building, we kind of used it as our marker for how to approach similar types of opportunities in other places in the building. So in Carlton Tower, up at the roof, we used the same sort of paradigm of trying to create tall spaces, open floor plan, furniture solutions, north-facing glazing, indirect light, access to nature and views, lots of places to plug in your devices. So we've tried to replicate some of the lessons we learned from the original long life, loose fit, low energy strategies and employ them up at some of the other places in the building. On the 5th floor of Carlton Tower, this is a faculty only zone, so students don't go to this area. This is just for the librarians and library support faculty. One of the strategies we used with the offices on this floor is to make them as uniform and as modular as we possibly could. And these particular cells show up on other levels up and down the building. And sometimes they're offices, sometimes they're meeting rooms, sometimes they're collaboration rooms, sometimes they're project rooms that students can reserve. So creating this module that's really flexible and adaptable, even within this floor, if needs were to change, these rooms could actually perform a number of different functions besides the offices that they currently are now. We used some demountable partitions. In this particular location, we had a heavily trafficked corridor on the right-hand side, and then on the left is where the most sort of experienced research librarians are doing very detailed assistance with patrons. We wanted to create some acoustic privacy there, but we wanted it to be able to be undone in the future if that became a programmatic necessity. So we used a dirt wall system for that particular location. The next project we're going to look at is at ABAC, Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College. We renovated the Carlton Center, which has a whole bunch of different programs in it, including the Baldwin Library, a bookstore, a student success center, and lots of student services like registrar's office, dean of students, and things like that. So a really complex program of student-facing programs. Our strategy here was one of addition by subtraction. A lot of things have been added to the building over time that weren't really contributing well to it. And there was this rather ungainly series of ramps and stairs in front of the building that once served a pretty important purpose, but could be done in a different way today. This was not a particularly beloved building, I think it's safe to say, on ABAC's campus. And they were seeking to inject some of that into this project and really re-image it and make it into a hub of activity that would be exciting for the young people on campus, for the students, and that they would embrace as a place where they want to be, not just some place they have to go. So we tried to work with the bones of what was working on the building, and with some minimal operations and a very low budget, about $180 a square foot, we did a complete interior gut renovation and some, as you can see, some extensive improvements on the outside with just a few discrete moves. On the interior, we also tried to use some be as flexible as allow for maximum flexibility in the future for the college. In the programmatic phase, we were laying out some administrative areas. The student accounts office, registrar's office, dean of students, and financial aid were configured in a sort of traditional demising wall on one side of a double-loaded corridor approach. One of the things we found, though, is that there are lots of redundant programs amongst these program areas. Each had their own waiting room, their own workroom, and we're looking for ways to consolidate those to save square footage and make the building a little bit more efficient. And so once we did that, we realized that we could really create sort of a loop, or what we call an ensuite approach to a multiple program administrative area, so that they share programs such as the break room, the workroom, the conference room, and the waiting room. And then it allows the offices to be laid out along the outside wall for all of the programs that are still housed. So it's still the 4 program areas, but they're sharing common uses. And what you see is that in the future, if say financial aid were to need to be larger, but student accounts could be smaller, they could achieve that transition simply by changing the names on the doors. It's a more flexible way to build change into the design that doesn't require invasive renovation. Somewhat similarly, in the bookstore and the IT repair suite, which is where students come to buy their computers or get them repaired or get various sort of tech support as relates to their computers, that's obviously a growing program for the college. They're going to have more and more and more need for that as time goes on. Whereas the bookstore, I don't think it's a secret to anyone, is probably something whose footprint is going to probably end up getting smaller rather than larger as time goes on and technology develops. So what we did is we tried to put those 2 program areas together in sort of a symbiotic way, so that when one grows, the other can shrink, hopefully along the same timeline, and without much disruption, we can create those changes and still allow businesses to remain open. And you know, these are changes that can be done very quickly. We tried to use furniture-based solutions wherever we could. You're seeing a picture here of the academic success suite, specifically the tutoring area. This is up on the top floor of the Carlton Center. On the left, you see before the furniture arrived, it's basically just an open plan space with lots of indirect outdoor light. This is facing toward the north and northeast. And so in the afternoons, we're getting all of this diffuse natural light that works really well. On the right, you see we basically use furniture to allow the different types of tutoring that happen in this space to occur. So individual work, one-on-one tutoring, peer-to-peer tutoring, group study, group tutoring, and a more social kind of study hall type atmosphere, all of which are addressed by different furniture solutions that can obviously be changed very easily in the future should some of those areas of focus need to change. And then the last sort of case study we're looking at is a project that we just now wrapped up construction drawings on yesterday, right, Garrett?
That's correct.
We just wrapped them up yesterday for the Armstrong Student Success Center on their Armstrong campus in Savannah. It's an existing gymnasium building that housed a competitive volleyball for years and years for Armstrong State. Now it's going to be used as an academic success center. And so similarly to what we tried to do at Georgia Tech with the Price Gilbert reading rooms that were really a strong existing asset that we could leverage, also with Payback, the sort of overall bones and structure of the building was very good. We tried to leverage that asset. Here, we're trying to take advantage of the height of the clear span gymnasium space where it's appropriate, and we've located the sort of most active parts of the program, and that's the sort of open tutoring, open study, study hall, peer-to-peer, individual collaboration areas underneath that tall ceiling, along with the mezzanine that kind of takes advantage of some of that height, and then the more private and quiet functions happen around the perimeter where the roof is lower, the ceilings are lower, and it's a little more appropriate. Here in the plan, you can kind of see the collaboration area in the center where the height is the greatest. And then as we get around the perimeter, the spaces are more cellular in nature. And speaking of those offices, similar to the Georgia Tech Library, those of you that manage facilities for universities know how important it is just from a political standpoint for the offices to all have the same square footage and the same size. And from a political standpoint, that is obviously critical that everybody feel that they're getting similar assets. Also, though, from a modularity and consistency standpoint, you're able to make some changes, and certain programs can grow and certain can shrink when all these offices are 120 square feet and they all kind of work in the same way. There are 5 different departments that are occupying these offices that you see in blue, and they can really be interchangeable very easily moving forward. Now, I think the final image for this project, we're trying to create a new entrance for the building. We have a very limited budget, and we created some simple storefront openings to sort of create new openness to a new lobby, and a canopy that will kind of protect pedestrians, but also be a bit of a signature element for the building. But one thing that was important for us was that we do this with minimal interruption to the basic building structure. The replacement of the roof is not part of the scope of this project, and so it was important for us to be able to do all of this with minimal engagement with the existing structure. So this canopy sort of exists on its own. It creates a weather-tight connection, but it does not penetrate the envelope of the existing building. And then 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when they do need to replace the roof and replace the parapet coping and all of that for the existing building, they can do so without even touching this canopy. So it's kind of an approach that recognizes that changes are going to come, and we need to design defensively toward this. And we don't have to sacrifice beauty and utility for that. So conclusions and strategies very quickly. Long life buildings are built to last. They are designed to remain relevant in the future and will survive the wrecking ball if they become beautiful and beloved places. Loose fit buildings are designed with a wide tolerance for change. They're designed with a flexibility that can adapt quickly to changes that happen very quickly and almost even within a single day sometimes. And then they're also adaptable, allowing more substantial reconfiguration to happen with minimum disruption. This has to do with getting infrastructure in places where modifications are less likely to happen so that it's less disruptive and less, the building has to be closed down for a shorter period of time to allow for a renovation. And then finally, low energy buildings require fewer resources to construct in the first place. They consume fewer resources across the span of their life, and then therefore cost less to operate, and hopefully will become embraced by facility managers and the people whose jobs it is to maintain and take care of these buildings. And it will also improve the people that use the buildings and become beloved places for them, places that they will want to protect and renovate and take care of in the future. So the basic concepts: flexible open planning, modular planning where possible, use of demountable partition systems where appropriate, trying to pair ascendant and descendant program areas in a symbiotic situation for maximum flexibility, using en-suite planning strategies that allow changes to happen programmatically without requiring construction changes to happen, using furniture-based planning to create areas for different types of activity as opposed to solid walls and infrastructure. And then the last one, reversible construction practices, things that as the building ages, different operations can take place without causing major surgery on either system. So I think that is about it. Garrett, I don't know if we've had any questions or anything like that, but I'll be happy to take questions.
Well, I think that was great, and it's great to be able to tie these ideas to projects, you know, as illustrations of how these ideas get implemented. And just thinking about each of the 3 projects that we've talked about, I know that we are focusing on layout and more of the architectural considerations, but just to add that there's a whole slew, and you've touched on a lot of them. So I just wanted to recap also of engineering coordination items that go along with each of these. You mentioned the regular structural bay, you know, some things that allow this flexibility or designing for the unknown over time. But then there are also things like the redundancy and technology needed in some of these study spaces that we're talking about that are relatively low cost items to be done up front to plan for that over time. And even just high level simple things like the location of plumbing facilities and the electrical room and the way the air is diffused within each of those spaces, so that if a space doubles in size, that can be reconfigured easily, you know, just by moving ductwork and things like that without whole system sort of reconfigurations. And so just wanted to say that was excellent, and then also mention that there's a whole slew of engineering implications for all the ideas that you're talking about as well.
That's definitely true. And, like I mentioned earlier, I learned about the long life loose fit concept from Steve McDowell of BNIM, who is our partner architect on the Georgia Tech Library project. And one of the more interesting things that we found working on that project was exactly what you're talking about, is resisting the urge to customize technology to a specific need, and instead trying to understand it in a way that will both serve its current specific configuration, but would also be useful in another way. And that's an easy thing to say and a harder thing to do. And sometimes it really requires a lot of collaboration and discussion to come up with what the solution really should be. And that's a good point.
Well, thanks again. And thanks everyone for joining. Later today, you'll receive an email that will allow you to download today's presentation and the option to take a short survey. We appreciate your feedback on that. We hope that you'll join us for the final part of this series, which is going to focus on the ways that high performance design can be integrated into renovation projects. And then as a reminder, the recordings of the previous webinars within this series are available on our website. And so with that, thanks again for joining, and we'll talk with you soon.